On today's special PWHL edition of Locked On Wild, the season is just about here, and Alexis Pearson is here to help get you ready for the first full year of the Minnesota Frost.
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into a special PWHL edition of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day, and we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode, we're talking all things Minnesota Frost and the PWHL as Alexis Pearson joins us to get you set for the start of the season, which it's hard to believe is already here next week. We'll talk about how the Frost sit amongst the rest of the PWHL. We'll talk about the league at large. My name is Seth Topal, host of Locked On Wild since 2021, and joined by a good friend of mine, Alexis Pearson. And Alexis, so excited to be doing this on a weekly basis, talking PWHL, talking Minnesota Frost, because there was a good response to what we did last year. And so I figured, why not do a little bit more of it this year?
Yeah, well, I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to always talk hockey with you, or anybody for that matter. That's my favorite thing to do. So anytime someone says, hey, let's talk a little hockey, I'm always on board. And of course, there's a lot of fun, exciting things going on with the league this year. Not the inaugural season anymore, so that storyline is gone, but there's so many new storylines to look forward to this season, not only just for the Minnesota Frost, but for the league as a whole. So it's been a fun week as we kick off opening week here. Games start this upcoming weekend here right after Thanksgiving, and then we're going to be off and running. And before we know it, we're going to be talking playoffs, off season. It's all going to go by fast, Seth.
Yeah, we're already 20 games into the NHL season, so it's like
don't even get me started on that. I refuse to believe it. I refuse.
Once things get rolling, it's pedal to the metal. And for formerly PWHL Minnesota, now the Minnesota Frost, the inaugural Walter Cup winners, and faced a lot of adversity in the season. Obviously, there was a lot that happened in the offseason. It started off on kind of a tumultuous foot, but now it seems like the dust has kind of settled a little bit. And so in the meetings that you've had, in the interactions that you've had with Minnesota Frost players, just how determined are they to start things off, to move past some of those things that happened in the offseason and really to get this season going?
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement. I was at practice yesterday. We're recording this on a Tuesday, so I was at practice on Monday. The players looked energized. It was a good vibe. There was a lot of hard work going on. Practice went a little longer than scheduled, which is always nice to see, getting those extra reps in. And we talked to Coach Kendall afterward, just previewing the season, talking about kind of where things are at, what they're looking forward to, what they learned from that first inaugural season, of course, because there was so much to take away from that season as you kind of figure out your identity, everybody else's identity. But then on top of that, there's a whole off season now where whatever identities these teams had might have changed in the off season. So whatever you learned, that doesn't mean that's set in stone for this year. So it was just nice getting a chance to talk to Coach Kendall and also kind of recap, what was the mindset for the draft and these players that you brought in? What are you hoping they contribute to this team? So it was really fun to be around the team yesterday. And I put a post on my Instagram story. I was like, I felt like I had just walked out of the PWHL draft at the beginning of June, and somehow it's opening week of the 2024-2025 season. So the off season flew by. It might not have felt that way for everybody as these teams sort out what their rosters are going to look like here for this upcoming season. But it was really fun to be around the team yesterday and just kind of get that energy of, all right, it's hockey season again.
The thing that's crazy to me too is you talk about trying to find your identity. There aren't many teams that can boast that they won the championship in the inaugural season while still kind of trying to to feel things out. And it's just, I think one of the things that made the first season so exciting is this franchise is going to adapt. They're going to evolve, but they have a championship under their belt, like right off the bat. And that's got to be exciting for the Frost to build off of, and a team that obviously views this as a sustained run as opposed to kind of hitting lightning in a bottle. So just tell me a little bit about, the pedigree that this Frost team is trying to instill as, hey, we're not going to just win one and, 15 years down the line, we're going to be talking about that one that we got. They want it to be 2, 3, 4. Oh, they want to be the New England Patriots of the PWHL. And that's difficult to instill when a league is just getting rolling.
It is. There's a lot of good things about winning a championship in your first season, but there's also the flip side of that of, okay, now you've set the tone. The fans are going to expect this. The management is going to expect this. The players are going to expect to be able to have this kind of success. And when I say expect, I don't mean that it's just given, right? This is something that the team is now going to have to work towards earning year after year. And in a place like in Minnesota, where us as fans are not used to championships, we cling on to the teams that do bring us that energy. We cling on to our Minnesota Lynx. We cling on to our Minnesota women's hockey teams because they're the teams that get it done. So you've now set that tone. You've shown that you're able to do it. And now it's going to be, can you come back and do it again? And the good news for Minnesota, and I would say this is the case with most teams entering year 2 here, but talking about Minnesota specifically, they didn't lose any big pieces. Their 2 starting goaltenders are coming back. Their captains are going to be all the same as last year, and they're bringing in a lot of new pieces they picked up in the draft that Coach Ken Klee is very excited about how they're going to fit into this roster. He talked at length yesterday about all of these pieces from the draft and how he sees them fitting in and all of their individual characteristics and how they're going to add to this team. So I really feel like Minnesota in the offseason did a good job of saying, we need to keep what worked because it worked, but also where can we fill some of these gaps that maybe made the season difficult at times, because it wasn't smooth sailing for Minnesota last year by any means. They went on that long run where they weren't winning games in the middle of the season. And then at the end of the season, they backed into the playoffs. It was thanks to an Ottawa loss that allowed them to even get there. And even the postseason wasn't picture perfect for them. So they're, despite being a championship winning team, there's still, of course, gaps they're looking to fill here to be even stronger this season. So I definitely think that based on what Coach Ken Klee said yesterday, they feel they've addressed those. Can you hear my dog barking? Somebody just delivered a package.
That's okay.
My apologies.
That's all right.
My dog is crazy.
That's fine.
The poor FedEx guy is like, this dog is crazy. Okay, so based on what Coach Ken Klee told us yesterday, it feels that this team has addressed the gaps they felt they needed to fill, and they've maintained what worked. So I'm optimistic that this is a team who can do good things this season. But of course, there's so many other teams that also wanted to adjust in the offseason and become better teams in the offseason. So I think we're going to learn a lot this first weekend here and see where we're at after everybody gets a game in.
We're going to do a little bit of a Meet the Frost for those that maybe aren't super familiar with the names on the roster, because as you said, a lot of the top pieces are still there, but there are some new additions as well. But let's sneak in a quick break, and then we'll come back, and like I said, we'll meet the Minnesota Frost as we continue today's special edition of Locked On Wild, the Minnesota Frost edition of Locked On Wild. More to come after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. My favorite thing is that you can support all of your favorite Minnesota athletes at once. For instance, you could pick Kirill Kaprizov. You could pick Anthony Edwards. You could pick Justin Jefferson. Twins aren't in action, but if you wanted to support Royce Lewis too, I fully support that. But Prize Picks allows you to mix and match, not just keeping things in one sport. So download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. Welcome back to today's special PWHL edition of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. And for Locked On Wild listeners, we got another episode coming for you later today. John Hynes, 3 things after the loss to the Winnipeg Jets last night. So be on the lookout for that coming later this afternoon. Alexis, before the break, we teased, as you mentioned, most of the key pieces are back for the Minnesota Frost this year. But for those fans that are coming in for the first time, are following this team after maybe not following them last year, who are some of the notable names, or who are the most notable names that will be leading the charge for the Frost this year that fans should be keeping an eye on?
Well, of course, there's the big names that made an impact last year, like the Taylor Heises, the Grace Zumwinkels, who were the flashy scorers who made the team so exciting to watch. But you've also got like the veteran leadership of Kendall, Coyne, Schofield, Lee Steckline, Kelly Panic, which, of course, those who've followed women's hockey in general for a long time would know those names, even if you're not even if you're a new Minnesota Frost fan. If you follow the sport, those are names that have made a big impact in the world of hockey, who've also made an impact on this Minnesota Frost team. But there's also some players who maybe floated under the radar a little bit, either because they didn't produce the highest points on the team or weren't always the flashiest players, but are some big returning names, some who signed some contracts in the offseason here to extend their time in Minnesota, like Liz Sheppers, who got her first goal in the postseason last year, but found a time to show up when the team needed her the most. A player like Denisa Shisheva, who kind of was on and off last year, where she'd show flashes of scoring and contributing, and then flashes where she wasn't as noticeable, but overall is such a tremendous player that is very important to this team. Michaela Kava, again, another player who was really big in the postseason. She got one of the goals in that championship game that solidified the Walter Cup for the Minnesota Frost. So there's so many pieces. And of course, I mean, I'd be remiss to not mention Nicole Hensley and Maddie Rooney, who were in between the pipes last season long. Split time, that's how Ken Klee likes to do it. He has an open conversation with his goalies, literally asking them, when do you want to play? It's a 3-way conversation between the two goaltenders and Coach Ken Klee. It's a very unique way to approach the situation. He's aware it's unique, but it works really well for them. It worked even in the playoffs. They pulled off this same method, and they were able to get the job done. So from top to bottom, this is a team that has so many pieces returning that were big names, in addition to all these new players that are really, I think, going to find a way to shine on this Frost team.
Who are some of those new additions that fans will be intrigued about as this season unfolds?
Well, there's still a little bit to be sorted out here. Rosters are due at the end of the day tomorrow, which is Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving. Speaking to the team yesterday, it seems like everything is as expected for this Minnesota Frost team. Really no big surprises as far as who's going to make it and who won't be making it, but they do still have to finalize everything and officially submit it. But based on what we talked to Coach Ken Klee about yesterday, some of the players that he's most excited about are the ones that are going to bring some more physicality to this Minnesota team. I think every team learned that physical play is a must-have on your team after what we saw last year. Of course, hitting is allowed in the women's league nowadays, and it was a physical game. We saw players kind of have to adjust to that on the fly. A lot of these women grew up not playing that way and not being taught how to play that way because it wasn't even allowed. So they're learning this stuff on the fly for the most part. And I think we saw that impact certain teams and certain players last year because they didn't know how to manage that at times. So, and the players love it, by the way. It's just a learning curve of, okay, how are we going to figure out how to play this style of hockey? And Coach Ken Klee felt that his team lacked a little bit of that physicality. And not that his players couldn't play physical, but players whose identity is to be physical is something that he's looking to add. And he listed a couple of the players they picked up in the draft, like Dom Petrie, Katie Knoll, who's coming out of Northwestern, who's had very good seasons as of late. These are some players that he feels can be physical. Britta Curl is somebody he thinks can play physical in front of the net as far as the offensive side of things goes and just causing some disruption. She's coming out of the University of Wisconsin. So what he talked about with these new players was physical. It kept going back to the physical and how can they play that style. He also talked about details and making sure that the details of everything they do is sharp. And he noted that a lot of these players they're bringing in have that instinctually to play very detailed hockey. And he really appreciated that. So when I say I feel they filled gaps, that's what I'm talking about, because everything he said yesterday was, here's what we lacked and here's how we filled it. And to me, it just seems Minnesota did everything right in the offseason.
Alexis, one of the other things that I like that you mentioned is just the pedigree that a lot of these skaters for the Frost, and not just the Frost. I mean, there are players throughout the league that have played at the highest levels of competition. You know, you're talking the Olympics and otherwise. And I think it brings an important amount of pedigree. It's no different than a team in the NHL having somebody that's won multiple Stanley Cups on the roster. You get to those high levels of competition, and it's just different. And if you're a young player who is, you know, a couple of years into your career, those opportunities, like, you don't have the time to react or to like think out how you're going to handle a situation. You just have to do it. And that's something that you learn through experience. But now they have all of these decorated performers on the roster to be able to guide them through that and say, when the moment comes to you, when the spotlight is on you, just do it. Like that, not to steal just the Nike slogan, but that's pretty much what it comes down to, is like, just do it, just get it done. And that's what it comes down to, but in the difference between winning and losing.
Yeah, and for a lot of these players, kind of like I mentioned, you know, they're learning a lot of this new on the fly. This game, the women's game, is changing so fast and moving in the right direction so fast. It's amazing how quickly things are moving the way that they want it to move, and it's been so neat to watch this from the broadcasting side of things unfold. And for these players on the ice, like I mentioned, there's nuances to the game that are just different. And the women's game is getting better. It's getting stronger. It's getting faster. Just like the men's game. You can say the same about the men, right? I mean, it's more about finesse and speed now than it is about physical play like it was back in the day. So every sport has this where it changes and it adjusts over time and it gets better over time. The women's game just seems to be happening at such an elevated rate because of the PWHL and what that opportunity means for these players. So a lot of these players are coming into this league and needing at times to adjust how they play the game, because the PWHL, the way the game is, it demands it. You need to be able to play physical now. You need to be able to match the speed of these other women. And so it's really cool to watch how these young players are learning to adjust to that. And I talked a lot at the draft when we covered that back in June about the fact that this is the first time the PWHL where players in the college ranks or even playing overseas got to watch a full season happen, go to a draft, have an entire off season, and enter the league. So they're already learning so many things about this league before they even play that first game that the players last year didn't have the luxury of. Everything happened so fast last year. Within a span of about 6 months, the PHF and the PWHPA had folded. This new league was created, and we were playing our first game. So now everybody has had a chance to have a quote unquote normal off season. And I think that's going to show itself in the way that these first games and this entire season unfolds this year.
Before we talk PWHL at large to close it out, Alexis, let's just talk about the Frost schedule here, which starts on December 1st against New York. And you've got games spread out all the way to the end of March with, I would assume, the final three that are TBD in April and May are playoffs. But just walk us through the schedule a little bit. You know, some of the quirks. It seems like there are going to be at least a couple of games a week, which is great. And it doesn't seem like there are any, you know, huge layoffs like we've had in previous seasons.
Yeah. So last time I was on your show, Seth, and I can't remember if we talked about this on air or off air. Like we always say, we're almost always talking hockey. I don't know when I'm being recorded and when I'm not, but we did mention this at some point, that I speculated, because this was before the schedule was released and we kind of knew how everything was going to shake out. I speculated that they might be playing more games per week because they added 6 games to the schedule. That's not the case. They basically are just starting a month earlier, and those games they're adding to the schedule are being played in that month. So they're not playing a more dense, tighter schedule really than they were last year. It's just a month longer. The playoffs are going to be in May like they were last year. the last possible date for a playoff game is like May 29th, I think. So it's all shaking out the same way. We're just starting a month earlier rather than starting on January 1st. We're starting November 30th. So that's one interesting thing to note. And for Minnesota specifically, they play a lot of the start of the season on the road, but then they have a really long home stretch. I mean, January, I don't even want to look at my schedule in January because it's scary. That's how many games they play at home in January. So they kind of start off with a chance to play a little bit on the road, a little bit at home, and then they have a stretch to really maybe string something together at home. I think they play like 6 or 7 games in a row at home. So something like that. They get to start the season at home against the New York Sirens, who last season, if folks followed along, New York was like the hottest team to end the season. For a team that played really poorly for most of the season, or maybe poorly is not the right word, they weren't getting the wins at the same rate that most of these other teams were. They were the best like special teams team at the end of the season. And I keep saying, if that season last year was 5 games longer, New York probably would have been a playoff team. That's how well they were playing. So that just because New York was the quote unquote worst team in the league last year, that Minnesota is going to take them lightly to start this season, because if any of that energy carries over, this game 1 for Minnesota and New York is going to be very fun to watch. So we do have a couple international breaks. There's like a break here in December. Then there's that other one in April for the Worlds. And then we regroup again like we did last year for a couple more regular season games at the end of April, beginning of May. And then playoffs in May, and we go from there. So it's going to unfold quickly, but I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun because there are a couple of rules tweaks. One big one that we will discuss, and we'll take a look at the teams to keep an eye on as the season gets going. As we finish today's PWHL edition of Locked On Wilds after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place your bets live on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. If you had the Chicago Bears rallying to cover in the second half, congratulations to you, because I don't think a lot of people would have had that one against the Vikings. But hey, that's what makes sports great, is a lot of crazy things happen, and then you end up winning in a walk-off field goal. There are bets for those kinds of things on FanDuel, so make sure to check it out. If you check it out today, you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. One final segment of today's PWHL edition of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. As we get this rolling, we will be taking listener questions too. So be on the lookout on our community tab if you've got questions for Alexis on the PWHL and the Minnesota Frost in general. We'll make sure to get those out there so that we can get them answered here on the show. But Alexis, let's just finish by taking a look. Obviously, this question is not going to have as much weight as it would if there were more teams in the league.
Yeah.
The fact that there are 6 it's not going to make a huge amount of difference, because most of the teams do make the playoffs. But who are the teams to watch out for this season in the PWHL? Obviously, Minnesota trying to repeat as Cup champions. Mm-hmm. But who are the other teams that really put themselves in position to make some noise this year?
Well, I was at the draft. I covered that with my broadcast partner, Clay Matvick. So I got a front row seat to watch how these teams tried to, bolster their rosters and fill some of these gaps that they had at the end of last year. And I really feel, I said this at the draft and I've said it since then, I feel like every team really addressed well what they needed in this offseason, whether that was goaltending, defense, physicality, like Minnesota claims that they were looking for. It just felt like everybody drafted really smartly. There wasn't too many picks where I was like, I don't know how that player is going to shake out on that roster. I don't know why they went that route. To me, I would say And I'll start the non-biased route, and then I'll finish with the biased route. To me, like we were just talking about, New York is a team I would be looking out for because of how strong they finished last year. I thought they did a good job at the draft. I thought they addressed some of the needs that they had entering that off season, and I just feel like this is a team that can come out, and I don't want to say shock people, but I think this could be a very competitive and could easily be one of the 4 playoff teams this season. Another team that I'm looking for, obviously Minnesota, just because to me, like I said at the beginning of the show, the good things didn't change, and the things they needed to change, they fixed. They seem to pick up the players that they were looking for to fill some of those gaps. So I do think Minnesota could be a team that definitely makes the playoffs and has a chance to repeat. Other than that, I mean, everybody is so talented in this league because there's only 6 teams. The parity in this league is so prominent, and every team has good goaltending, good offense, good defense, and it really is just any given night anybody can win. And we saw every team at some point last year go on some kind of streak, winning, losing, whatever it was. And it came down to those last couple games at the end of the season to figure out who was going to be in the playoffs. I don't expect anything different this year, but I do think there maybe could be some new teams in the playoffs this year, depending on how things shake out. So I would say keep your eyes peeled for New York this year. That's my take.
I like that. We've got a new rule, or a rule change, I should say, that should provide some interesting things throughout the course of the season. The no escape rule, as it is being called. The rule states that a team that takes a penalty is not allowed to line change until after the next face-off. It's basically the same as not being able to line change after an icing, but I got to say, I like that the PWHL is trying to kind of be on the cutting edge with a lot of these rules. It just leads to a fun product, and I think it shows that they're willing to try new things and are willing to just kind of see how things play out with some subtle little tweaks.
Well, they said all through last year, anytime we were on a call with the league, with officiating, whoever was on the call, they said multiple times, we are looking to adjust on the fly. If something's not working with the rule book, with a certain rule, with a certain element, we want to change that. So they've been very transparent with that the rule book last year was not set in stone. They were looking to make adjustments as needed. And really the big one, the really only important one to note was this no escape rule. I think it's unique. I'm not sure how I feel about it yet. They've already implemented it in the mini camps that they had in Toronto this past week. And it seemed to do what they were hoping it would do, which is provide more power play opportunity, more power play goals, which anybody who watched the league last year knows special teams was a big problem last year across the board. The special teams, the power plays last year were averaging like 7-8% was like the average high. And or in other leagues, typically a good power play would be somewhere in the high teens, right? If you're averaging close to 20%, you're in good hands. You're at the top of the league. So This is about half of what you would expect. And some teams only had a couple power play goals the entire season. So I believe that the league hasn't said this outright. I believe this was a change made to try to fix some of that. How can we get more power play scoring? And who's going to complain about more scoring? Everybody wants more scoring. So I have no problem with this rule. And like you said, think of it as icing. You can't change till the face-off happens. But the unique thing is this gives power play units a chance to maybe trap a unit on the ice that is not prone to penalty killing, or even think about if it's just maybe not some of your better players. Now, all of a sudden, you got to find a way to kill a penalty. You might have, 2 defenders out there, 2 forwards, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, what are we doing here? Only half these players are penalty killers. So I like the idea of it. I'm really curious to see how it bolsters maybe some of these power play numbers for these teams. And for the most part, I felt like last year, the teams were doing a lot of right things on the power play. They're cycling the puck. They have the zone time. They're getting some opportunities. It was just the finishing of these chances that was lacking for a lot of these teams last year. So we'll see if this rule changes anything. This one is unique. And then, of course, we've talked about it before, but the jailbreak rule that the PWHL has, where if you score a shorthanded goal, your player comes out of the box. Get Gary Bettman on the phone, because I've been trying to get the NHL to do this for years, between trying to bring back the Northwest Division, changing the playoff standing system, and this. Those are like my 3 gripes with the NHL. Jailbreak rule of like worldwide thing, because I think if you score a shorthanded goal, you've done your work. You deserve to have your player come out of the box. So those are kind of the two unique ones. Jailbreak rule is not new. The no escape rule is. But yeah, like you said, it's just cool to see the league be open to trying different things, and how can we make it exciting? How can we make more scoring happen? And how can we be flexible and adjust on the fly? Because this is a new thing for all of us. We're just trying to figure out what works. And the fact that at all facets of the league, they're open to change and to being able to adjust, it says a lot about what they're trying to do here.
Yeah, most definitely. Let's just finish by talking about the Takeover Tour quickly, Alexis. The 6-team league selected 6 U.S. cities: Raleigh, Buffalo, Detroit, St. Louis, Denver, and Seattle, and Canadian stops in Vancouver and Quebec City, with one site yet to be announced, as a way to kind of further spotlight the league and create some interesting stops for neutral site games. This is another exciting wrinkle. It's similar to like the Winter Classic and the Stadium Series that the NHL does. Just trying to get some more eyes on the PWHL, and there is nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah, this is amazing. They had a couple neutral site games last year that went really well. And when I first heard how many games they were shooting for this year for neutral site games, I was like, holy cow, we just went for it. We went from this to this. And I loved it. I was so excited. And I wasn't sure if it was going to come to fruition, if the number was going to be that same number when they finally locked down all those dates. But it was. I was told 9, and 9 is what happened. So well done to the league for making it happen. This was a vision of theirs at the start of last off season. Coming into this year, they really worked hard to solidify some locations where they felt that the fan bases would really thrive with bringing some of these PWHL teams in to watch some of these games. And of course, we all know that this could be foreshadowing for where some new teams could land in the future. How far down the road that is, I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows right now, but it would be cool to see how these games go in some of these new locations, because if there's a good enough response, those might move to the top of the list as expansion cities in the future for the PWHL. So I'm really excited to see this, and just to, spread the word of the league, because again, part of what this is marketing. You have to get the name out there. You have to get these faces and names and players out there. And being able to do that in non-PWHL cities is a big part of what they're trying to do here. So if you are in any of those cities and you want to go watch a PWHL game, go get your tickets and go check them out, because it's a really great opportunity to watch some really great hockey in some of these non-PWHL markets currently.
And it all starts for the Minnesota Frost on December 1st at 5.
Yes.
So all PWHL fans, yes, grab your tickets so that you can see them in person. Enjoy Thanksgiving. And then it's time for the PWHL season to begin shortly after that.
And one quick thing, as we're talking about this, if you do get your tickets, they're doing a banner raising ceremony for the Walter Cup before that first game. There's going to be some fun people in attendance. If you're a fan of the Wild, I'll just say that there might be some people you like to see. So they're working on getting some people in the doors for that, to make that ceremony really special. So not too often in Minnesota we get to watch a banner raising ceremony. So get your tickets. Don't give me an excuse. Just get to the X on Sunday. I'll see you there.
Yeah, make it a fun weekend and a fun way to kick off the start of the season. Alexis, thank you for the time today. I can already tell that this is going to be just a blast as the season unfolds. So you enjoy Thanksgiving as well, and we'll touch base with you after the season gets rolling, with a couple of games in place when we chat again next week.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving to you and to everybody watching. Thanks for tuning in. I'm excited to join Seth throughout the season. And check out the PWHL schedule. Find some games you can get to this season. I'd love to see people at the rink. You guys were awesome last year showing up, and I want to see that again this year. So a lot of fun stuff to look forward to.
Listeners, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of these episodes, as well as our regular Locked on Wild episodes. Also, you can find all of them every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.